For as long as I could remember, I'd always struggled to believe the way I was supposed to. Back when I was 16, I was hard on my parents, testing my limits to see how far I could push them. I saw them as oppressive, not willing to engage with anything that made them uncomfortable. But now that I'm older, I can appreciate that they were trying their best. They didn't have all the answers, but thought that as parents and good Christians, they should fake it till you make it, and all that. And in return, I was supposed to accept their word at face value, as was the natural order between parents and their children. You'll do as I say because I said so, and that is that. But then my brother disappeared and the natural order of everything crumbled. Brian normally came home from band practice at the same time each day, but on April 12, 2015, I didn't hear his keys jingle as he unlocked the door. Didn't hear his old beater pulling up into the driveway. Didn't hear any gripes about how the girl on first chair wouldn't shut up about her new strings. I think about that first evening so often. How I told myself that he was just running a bit late. Normally, when it happened, he gave us all a heads up. Since I was grounded again, I had to ask Dad if he'd gotten any texts. Nothing. Not on my phone or his. Brian normally came home at 6 o'clock. The clock chimed 7. Then 8. Then 9. While Mom, Dad, and I waited to hear his car, his voice, the phone ring, anything, that was when it began. The quiet. The thing no one tells you about when someone you love doesn't come home is how the silence that fills the air where their laughter should be is louder than any scream. You should be hearing their footsteps in the hall. You should be arguing over who used up all the hot water in the shower and put Dad in a bad mood. There should be a light on in his room as he listens to his metal music that our parents tolerate because, if that's Brian's way of rebelling, I'll take it. The quiet kills you. That first night when Mom called the police, her voice was hushed as if afraid that speaking too loudly would make the nightmare real. As long as we didn't talk about it, it wasn't as bad as we thought. Just a misunderstanding. He was running late. That was that. Hours turned into days. More muted conversations with the police. Both Mom and Dad looking at me to make sure I couldn't hear. However, their faces told me more than words ever could. In just the span of a few days, they looked much older. I aged, too. Everyone in town and members of our church banded together to go on searches. He was probably just lost in the woods. Probably just at a friend's house. You know how boys are, at that age. It didn't matter that Brian wasn't like that. It's just how boys are, because it's better than the alternative. Days of oblivion, not knowing if Brian was alive or dead, became weeks. The searches kept going, but less and less people showed up to call his name in the faint hope that something besides the coyotes would answer. He was just lost in the woods. He would turn up, eventually. Even though I never saw the appeal of the music that he liked to listen to, I would sneak into his room at night. Turn on a CD player. If his music was playing, he wasn't gone. He was just in the room right next to mine. I knew exactly where he was. We knew exactly where he was. One night, I caught Dad sneaking in to sit on his bed. The silence was broken as the man that I used to think of as authoritative and unbreakable caved in on himself, trying to muffle his sobs with Brian's pillow. I came in and joined him, hugging him as tightly as I could. Mom followed soon after, embracing us both, her sobs accompanying ours. The pillow still had his scent. Like he was right there, trapped within the threads, buried too deep where we couldn't reach him. It was at this point that I had begun to pray, despite all of my unanswered questions and skepticism. I didn't know what else to do. If Brian couldn't answer us when we called his name, maybe God would. Just this once. 3 months after Brian's disappearance, he was found. I will never forget the way my mother howled his name. Over and over as if her grief would be enough to call him back to where he belonged. It doesn't matter how long it's been. I can't say what happened to him. I just can't. He wasn't just murdered. Thinking about what was done to him makes me want to dig up the man that took him from us and hammer his bones into powder. Death wasn't enough for him. Nothing was enough for him. Clearly, I wasn't the only one that felt that way. When Brian's abductor was found, he didn't last very long behind bars. Reportedly, before giving him his due, one of the members of his lynch mob told him, "If you ain't a praying man now, you'll be by the time we're done with you." That's where the problem came in. He did pray. He pleaded for forgiveness. Not from the mob. Not from my family. Not even from Brian. God's kingdom is open to all, even the depraved, the unkind, the hateful, even to people like him. All that is required for the gates to open and to feel the warmth of his love is to ask for this forgiveness. And ask, he did. But what did it mean for Brian? How could his soul possibly find rest if the one who sent him to heaven before his time was right there with him? This was one of the many questions that haunted me. But back before he was taken away from us, it had just been a thought experiment with no real stakes. What if a hypothetical victim was trapped in what should have been paradise with their hypothetical killer? Just a word problem, like in math class. If John had 12 apples and Judy takes 8 and Sarah gives him 4 times the amount of that, does that do him to spend an eternity with the man that brutalized him? For Brian's saga, I had to know if it was true, but I wouldn't dare ask that question. My parents had been through enough. To this day, and as a parent myself now, I still don't know how they did it. How they were able to wake up each morning knowing that one of their babies was going in the ground. So without voicing the terrible question to a single soul, I prayed for Brian to find peace. Along with that, I prayed for an answer, though I didn't expect one. However, I did receive one. And it wasn't from God. On the day of the funeral, I'm ashamed to admit that I was afraid to go to the casket, even though it was closed. Dad's eyes were empty as he held my mom, who'd had her face buried in his chest since we arrived. If she didn't look, it wasn't real. Likewise, I stood at the end of the long carpet leading up to where the casket sat, overwhelmed by the hushed chatter and terrible organ music playing through the church's crackling speakers. I tried to tell myself that it wasn't him. It was just a body. No, it wasn't even a body. It was a wax figurine inside, modeled to look like him. A dummy. A fake. Even better, the casket was empty, and this all was just a dream. My cheeks were wet. My eyes burned, the golden lights in the church becoming beams. I couldn't breathe. My feet had sprouted roots that grew up to the center of the earth. They wouldn't move. If you forget to say goodbye, you'll regret it. The same priest I've known since childhood. Despite how tender and gentle his voice was, I didn't want to accept his hand when he offered it. I didn't want it to go. Even though he was most likely right, the roots in my legs were stuck firm. I closed my eyes. His hand disappeared into mist, leaving my palm damp and cold. The quiet weighed on my ears to the point of pain. When my eyes opened, the church was empty. No priest. No mom and dad. The church looked completely different in the dark. Larger. Or maybe I had gotten smaller, somehow. Either way, I didn't feel welcome. The only thing that remained was the coffin. Standing up, now. Facing me. Is it Brian's nickname for me? I used to hate it, but before the moment, I would have given anything to hear it again. He was whispering from inside, his voice echoing in the hollow, deserted sanctum. His voice sounded strange. Raspy. Dry. My hands shook. I couldn't move. It's not right, he continued, his voice cracking in a way that made me want to shatter like glass. It's not like they said. I opened my mouth, but I wasn't sure what I was going to do. Scream. Speak. Neither happened. The roots had grown upwards to take over my vocal cords as well. That was when the air changed in the room. Like the electric tension in the atmosphere before a storm arrives. My hair stood on end. Automatically, I knew where the lightning had struck, turning my head to see not a bolt of electricity, but a girl. The girl was the same age as me, maybe a bit older. She was slouched, staring at a glittering blue rosary tangled around her fingers as if it was a puzzle she was trying to solve. Brian's murmurs continued as I fought to get my body to do something, anything but just stand there. We don't have much time, Isabel said, the girl plainly, her head slowly turning to meet my gaze. They'll come looking for him soon. As if she'd broken a spell, my legs finally moved. On their own accord, they guided me to sit next to her. She didn't blink or move as I approached her. Once I'd slid into the pew, I spoke for the first time that day, the words scratchy as if being played from a broken radio. Is this real? Letting the rosary drop, swinging in her long fingers, the girl gingerly reached forward to use her thumb to wipe my tears away. Her hands felt clammy on my flushed cheeks, face hot from how much I'd been crying. It certainly felt real. Izzy, Brian's sobs were constant. Her eyes. The girl's eyes were strange. She gazed through me. Into me. Stripping away skin, muscle, bone. Who are you? I asked. She didn't blink. Those peculiar eyes continued to dig into each and every atom of my being as she said softly, when you were a little girl, you used to beg your mom to keep the whole light on. You'd get a running start and jump onto your bed, thinking that I was hiding underneath. Waiting to grab you, heart pounding, I started to pull away from her, knowing now who I was speaking to. The girl's voice came out as a whisper, and you were right, Bun. I had to run. She stayed seated, observing me as I raced for where the exit should have been. Brick. The door was gone. Brian was crying quietly from his coffin. Even though I grew up going to the church, it had changed, becoming a brick cage. No doors. The windows were dark, as if the world outside had vanished, leaving only the sanctum. The girl waited patiently as I searched for some way out. Any way out. She'd gone back to examining our rosary, completely apathetic. In the meantime, Brian had begun to plead with me again. He's with me. It happens over and over again. I can't get away. Please. Does that answer your question? The girl's voice floated over his agonized whimpers as she continued to toy with the cross. About what the kingdom is like. The words came out of my mouth without a thought. Oh my God, he loves you, the girl muttered distantly as she rose from the pew. He loves everyone. Every sin, every sinner. even the ones he sends to me. You're all equal in his eyes, even when you aren't. The hammer is the nail, and as long as they love him back and plead his forgiveness, they will stay together. My voice came back, angry and bereaved as she spoke each word with a cold detachment of stating a simple fact. What do you want? Why are you doing this? You wanted an answer, she replied as she came to stand in front of me. She was much taller, though their overwhelming presence made her seem even larger. And I want souls. Your brother isn't in a position to offer his anymore. Only the living of that luxury. You'll have to do it for him. My heart beat even faster, my breath coming quicker as the weight of her words finally clicked within my frantic brain. You can't be serious. Her face betrayed no emotion. Shall I let the angels take him back? At that, Brian's pleading became more urgent. Begging her and I not to let him go back to heaven, where he was. I couldn't bear it. My hands covered my eyes, as if by hiding, I could make the last 3 months all go away. As Brian began to beat on the lid of his coffin, the girl spoke over him, sounding almost wistful. He won't find paradise or rest in hell. Neither of you will. But there's a sort of freedom there. One that Brian has no access to without your help. Even now, all these years later, I still can't understand why any of this had to happen. Not just to us, but to anyone. When I responded, my voice sounded like someone else's, coming out haggard as it became harder and harder to breathe. How do I know this isn't a trick? How do I know that? The girl simply said, open the coffin now. Brian screamed from within the wood. I don't want you to see me like this. The girl still did not blink, nor had her eyes flickered from my face. You know that I'm telling you the truth, Isabel. For you, damnation is your only salvation. His salvation. This entire time, he has suffered. He will suffer less with me. What do you get out of this? I choked out. What could our souls possibly mean to you? Not much. Not much, and all that cold hand brushed a lock of hair behind my ear. She remained impassive as I recoiled from her touch. She continued, you'll be mere droplets in the ocean. Absolutely indiscernible from the rest. Where you end and they begin, I won't recall. But you're still droplets that he doesn't get. 2 baptized souls that I've stolen away from my father. She stopped to kneel in front of me, reaching to cup my chin. This time, I didn't retreat. The girl, the devil, sounded earnest as she uttered, I will never love you. Not like how he does. But his love hurts you. It hurts all of you. Knowing what you know now, can you honestly say that his love is preferable to my neglect? For the first time, I found some courage as I accepted the devil's help as she wrapped a hand around my forearm, aiding me in standing up. Once upright, I allowed her to lead me towards the coffin. In the meantime, Brian kept pounding at it. It loomed over me, more like a doorway than a casket. A door I was terrified to open. The devil then mirrored the same sentiment that the priest had before she'd brought me here. If you forget to say goodbye, you'll regret it. From the other side of the wood, Brian begged me not to. Hesitantly, I set my shaking fingertips against the lid. Abruptly, the beating stopped. From the other side, I felt a soft thud against my palm. In my mind's eye, I saw Brian putting his own hands against mine, separated only by wood. Don't open it. Please, he whispered, sounding as if something had broken within him. My whole life, it had been said that the devil is a deceiver, seeking to tempt and torment mankind with sin. It occurred to me that this whole thing could be a trick. A demon posing as my brother could be within that coffin instead of him. However, I also had been told that the devil would be a man and that heaven was a paradise. I need to see you, I rasped, my voice coming out like it belonged to someone else. I need to know for sure quietly, but enough to make my vision blur as it became overrun with more tears. Brian muttered, it hurts after a swallow and a shudder. I reached for the coffin's lid. I wish it had all been an elaborate trick, after all. The mortician had tried. They used stitches to bring what was left of Brian's cheeks together. Shutting his eyes, closing the hole in his forehead where flies had already begun to nest. As if the more thread they used, the more they could erase the atrocity that had happened to him. How his body had sat by the side of an abandoned lot for weeks, clothed and unnoticed until some kid had stumbled across it looking for a smoke spot. His skin moved with all the organisms that now lived inside of him, taking life from his dead flesh. As he silently reached forward to pull the coffin lid back over himself, I doubled over the nearest pew of the few bites of breakfast I'd been able to stomach that morning violently fought its way out of my mouth. The devil simply observed, the rosary swinging from her hand like a pendulum. That's why I didn't want you to see. Brian sounded remorseful. The devil finally spoke again. I regret to inform you that you're running out of time. You need to make a decision quickly. Staggering as my whole body shook at the memory of things squirming beneath Brian's bloated, splotchy cheeks, I approached the casket once again. This affected him the most. Heaven couldn't be heaven while he was trapped like this. What do you want, Brian? Please don't make me go back. I pressed my forehead against the wood, wondering how the hell was I supposed to do this. If it's any consolation, once you join him, you won't be alone anymore. I believe this was the devil's attempt at providing some semblance of comfort. It was delivered in a deadpan tone with no trace of warmth on her face. There were so many other things plaguing my mind. An eternity of torment for both of us. And our parents. What about them? We'd never see them again. They'd be stuck in God's kingdom with Brian's killer. Bang. I jumped, whirling around. The church shook. Dust rained from the bricks as whatever was out there pounded on the wall. What followed was an outraged roar like metal gears grinding against each other, so high in pitch that I had to cover my ears. Once the roar finally subsided, the devil informed me, "The angels are coming, that's an angel." Brian called through the casket, "Isabel. I'm alright." I assured him, but my frantic shout probably wasn't convincing. The devil was beginning to lose her patience, so she told me once again, "You need to make a decision. Now. Or they'll take him back." The thing outside released another deafening cry. Stark, white light began to flow through the windows. The grinding sound bounced a bit. A laugh. "Isabel," the devil said my name so firmly, with more power behind it than I have ever heard in my life, that I had no choice but to focus on her. All went quiet. Brian's shouts. The angels' attempts to batter down the church walls. It was just her and I do it. Take him. And tell them I love him. To this day, I don't know if the choice I made was the right one. But for the first time, the devil smiled. Then the wall broke, flooding the church in blinding light as the grinding made me want to crawl out of my skin. A hand seized mine. With a cry, I wrenched it away and stumbled back, unable to keep my legs below me as I scrambled away. "Isabel." The voice was familiar. Not the devil. Not Brian. The lights were back on. The priest who'd offered to walk with me was looking down at me with a mixture of concern and pity. At some point, I'd ended up on the floor. Mom had re-emerged from the protective cocoon of Dad's embrace as they both rushed towards me in alarm. The church had gone silent as all would come to pay their respects, watched and send sympathy. Only the somber organ music playing over the speakers remained. For years, I never told anyone about what happened for obvious reasons. It sounds like a grief-induced psychological episode. And for a while, that's what I told myself it was. But I remember every word from that visit from the devil. I remember exactly how it felt in her dark, imprisoning version of our family church. I recall that moment more profoundly than my wedding day, or when I held eager at my newborn sons in my arms. Eventually, there came a time that I couldn't deny to myself anymore, and I'd become morbidly curious about how many others were off with this deal. I began to reach out to other families who had gone through similar losses to what mine had. It turns out that the answer to the question is too many. This may sound silly, but those of us who've accepted the devil's offer have formed a little support group. We meet once a month. All of us know that there is nothing that can be done. It's just nice to be around others who get it. Others who willingly damn themselves and their loved ones. If anyone reading this has ended up in a similar situation, I encourage you to DM me. I'll give you the details. You'd be amazed at how much it helps to be in a room with people that understand the terrible choice you had to make. While I can acknowledge now that this was a spectacular burden to place upon a teenage girl, I am glad that I was approached rather than one of my parents. It took years for Mom to smile again, and the stress of everything nearly sent my father to an early grave. As terrible as it sounds, I can't summon the courage to tell either of them about the deal. I know that it's wrong to keep something like this from them, but they comfort themselves with the idea of reuniting in heaven with Brian someday. How do you look your parents in the eye and tell them that you took their son away from them again? The guilt is the hardest thing to live with. Even though I know it was better than sending Brian back to where his tormentor was for all of eternity, I still question myself. Everyone in our group does. So I'll say it again. If anyone else has been approached by the devil, please reach out. You're not crazy. You didn't imagine it. And you don't have to deal with this alone.